Good morning, good evening, everyone. Bari Yereko. My name is Vineti. I am the moderator for today's panel discussion. Welcome to the Black Box of Tech Startup Acquisitions. This event is part of Online Hero Talk series, which is organized and hosted by the Hero House. Viva MTS has joined this initiative as a corporate partner and supporter. Welcome again. Wanted to introduce our esteemed panel and the panelists. We have with us today Ezra Roizen, Rachel Fisher, and Razmik Abnous joining the discussion on the acquisitions and demystifying the process of the acquisition lifecycle. Ezra, if I could ask you to please introduce yourself briefly and your background.
Hey, I'm Ezra Roizen. Nice to meet everybody. My background has been advisory for 20-something years. Before that, briefly as an entrepreneur. Work with startups to think about developing relationships with strategic players in their sector, and then also wrote the book on startup M&A called Magic Box Paradigm, which aligns with at least the black box part of the title. So excited that we're demystifying it, and trying to demystify the M&A process for founders has been beyond what our work is day to day. It's been the mission of our company. So great to meet everybody, and looking forward to a good discussion.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Ezra, and welcome. If I could ask Razmik Abnous, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good night in Armenia. Again, this is Razmik Abnous. I'm been a CTO in several companies. I'm a software guy at heart. Been a sort of 2-3 companies to mention. It's one is Documentum. I was one of the founding architect. The Documentum sort of had a great ride. We went through IPO and eventually sold to EMC at a large sum. After that, I did several other startups as a co-founder, and one is Vineti. Vineti, which is based in Silicon Valley, but has offices in Yerevan. We have about 50 developers, if I'm not wrong, as of the last count in Yerevan. It's sort of my pride that I eventually got to do something in Armenian high tech. I've been involved with Armenia's high tech industry since 1990s, but from 2000 on, I was a lot more engaged, and I was very, I would say, a proud moment to see Vineti established office in Yerevan. But right now, I'm also doing several work, and I'm involved with several incubation and startups. And I'm still at heart a technologist, where I like to see where enterprise software meets technology innovation. And that's really what my new venture called Digital Insight is all about.
Thank you, Razmik. And with us, Rachel Fisher. Thank you, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Fisher. I am the Managing Director of EdTech Venture Partners, and I am primarily an entrepreneur. My last business was EdTrainingCENTER, and it was an online learning company that focused on compliance and professional development, continuing education for staff who work in public school districts here in the United States. We grew that company and sold it to a strategic partner that was private equity backed. It was an acqui-hire, so we also came on board, and they engaged in what we all know of now as a PE roll-up. So they purchased 14 companies in about 1.5 years. We stayed on with them through that interesting ride from 75 to 600 employees. And they subsequently sold again to the next private equity firm for a unicorn valuation. So I got to see everything from the start of an idea all the way through a second exit. After that, I went on and I spent about 1 year in venture capital. And now I primarily work with startups and private equity-backed companies in the EdTech space, consulting and helping them to grow and scale.
Thank you, Rachel. The topic we have today, technology acquisitions, are very relevant for our audience. If we think about specific technology-related questions and this black box of the acquisitions, we'll focus a little bit more on the acquisition side, not on the merger, as we talk about M&A kind of equation. So, Ezra, would you walk us, please, through the framework of a technology acquisition by a larger corporation, for example, of a smaller company in the high-tech space?
Yeah, I'm going to cover a lot of ground quickly, so we don't hog too much of the time. I want to give everybody else a lot of window to give their piece. But by the way, a lot of what we cover here, I'll give one plug, is in the book. So if you're interested, get Magic Box Paradigm. And as I say, people, you can pay our firm $1 million in fees or spend $20 on Amazon. It's your choice. So if you think about startup acquisitions broadly, and it's a unique asset class, there's its own dynamics. Almost all the value of a startup is in the future, which is an interesting dynamic. So it's very hard to measure what a startup's worth based on its past. So the narrative around a startup and the narrative around an acquisition is directional. So a big company, and I'm looking forward to Razmik and Rachel's opinion on this and their view, but a big company buys a startup because they're trying to go down a path. And you represent an advancement down that path, which is faster than another path they could take. And so they look at it and they say, directionally, we want to go that way. We think the world is forming that way. It isn't exactly what you do today in almost every case. It's you are a part of a bigger vision that they have, and understanding what that future state of the world may be and your role in that future state, and then understanding what the dynamics of the combination could be to capitalize in that future state are really important. And so a couple of heuristics and things we have. So first off, I would say for anybody watching this, if you're new to M&A, new to startup M&A, it's not about doing the deal. It's fun to get caught up in dynamics and valuation and all this crap. It is not that. The game is played much earlier. The game is played in the thesis. What's the thesis? What's the opportunity? What's the relationship? What's going to get a big company, particularly on the strategic side? The private equity world's a different animal. We'll leave that aside for now. What's going to get a big company excited about how you can help them achieve something important for them? And almost always it's around some new technology innovation and some large opportunity they see, not the way you would frame it. And so two heuristics I'll end with on that. One, we see that the value of a startup is opportunity divided by scarcity. So I know there's a lot of tech geeks on the call. So if there's a meeting one, valuation equals opportunity divided by scarcity. If you have a large numerator in the opportunity, it's $1 billion opportunity, you're on the right track. If you have a small number in the denominator, hopefully one, meaning you're the only company that can help that strategic capture that value, and you've articulated your opportunity thesis and your value and your scarcity thesis well, you can get a very high outcome. And that's why you get eye-popping valuations for some technology startups. However, if there's a big opportunity, but the scarcity value is 100, it doesn't just drop linearly, it drops non-linearly down in terms of what the perceived market value of your startup would be. So I'll leave it with just that one. But if you think about ultimately, if you had to think of a very simple distillation of how you're going to frame the conversation to the strategic, valuation equals opportunity divided by scarcity. Think of it that way, and then everything else will unpack from there. But remember, it's directional. That's the key thing. It's not what you are exactly today. It's what you could be with them. Is the critical thing to carry in the back of your mind. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. And I actually wanted to add one more. What I see from the corporate side, being more on the corporate due diligence, is timing is another factor. It's not directly in the equation, but timing determines how critical, so that kind of numerator size and the opportunity, how critical is it in this time frame, in this product development, product roadmap, in this particular set of circumstances, and that is a big factor as well. So Ezra, that ties really well to the next question that I'll pose to the entire panel, but would like Razmik to start with is, why do corporations buy, and when is a good time to consider a sell?
Yeah. So in many ways, I like the way Ezra defined the framework, but I'm going to say actually extension of the way he laid out the framework. And again, just to put some context, I didn't get into my intro, But Documentum was acquired by EMC, and Documentum at the time of acquisition was a company with 2,500 employees, $250 million revenue. EMC, when they bought us, was a company $15 billion revenue with 30,000 employees. So we thought we were large till we got into EMC's ocean. But before EMC acquisition, Documentum acquired 10 companies, ranging from 100 million to 50 million and thereabouts. Post-acquisition, over the 5 years, our revenue went from 250 to 850. Why am I saying all of this? It goes back into the framework, and I'm going to talk about the why, and I'm going to go back to this historical experience I had. So why do companies acquire? There are several dimensions. Again, one is first and foremost, again, I am not discussing private equity. Again, that's just like Ezra said, private equity buys for a different reason. That's not what we're doing here. It's really, why does a public company or a other company wants to buy a startup? Again, even Documentum, in the context of EMC, even though we had 250 million in revenue, to EMC, we're viewed as a startup. Just want to make sure you understand what startup means to different size company. So again, the whys ranges. One is revenue. They're buying because we have a revenue that is attractive for them. They could also buying you for a strategic fit. Again, Ezra talked about it's where they're going. So in the context of EMC, Documentum was a document management company. EMC was storage management company. EMC wanted to go to information lifecycle management space, which means they needed to buy companies that they handled information management at large. And Documentum was a perfect fit in that future direction. So that's a strategic fit story. Again, they're buying you for growth. Growth meaning they either want to go to, again, revenue is at one angle of growth, but the other angle of growth is market. If you're not selling to a specific market that is adjacent to market that your company's in, more likely you're going to buy a company to take you to an adjacent market with a different product. Fourth dimension is talent. Again, we all know it, Silicon Valley is short of talent. So you're always acquiring talent. And again, it can't be the only reason. Do not, in my opinion, do not approach a company, say, I have 5 developers that I'm selling. That's not a good story to start. But it is a critical part of what they're buying. Again, same thing, technology. Oracle has been a company who's bought technology over and over again. Like Oracle bought BEA at the time, which was a J2E app server technology, just because at the time, again, market timing, app servers with the Java engine was the biggest time at the time, and it was happening too fast for Oracle to develop that from scratch, which they could do. They would lose the market timing. Again, I want to come back to one thing that is very important. I'm going to go back to market. Again, remember, go back to Documentum in EMC. Documentum was a document management company. EMC was a storage management company. I'm going to talk about the concept that I learned from a guy named Jeffrey Moore, which a lot of you know. He wrote a book called Cross the Chasm, but he wrote a subsequent book called How Do Dinosaurs Dance, or something like that. It was about the giant companies like EMC or IBM or Intel or Microsoft, why they buy company. And he talked about this whole section called core versus context. Core, think about this way, like to EMC, core to EMC, the core business was storage management. Documentum was a contextual business, which was document management. Again, it's not tied to storage, but we drive storage revenue. So what they were buying was a Documentum as a contextual business on top of their core business. So what does that do? So a lot of time, core, you sort of absorb the context into core. A lot of times it's very possible that the context becomes so much bigger that it absorbs the core into it. And again, this is very hard to predict. As Ezra said, when you build a thesis of where you want to go, a lot of times, again, like information lifecycle management, it was going to push EMC to be a software company versus a storage company. But then that transition, that transformation from core to broader context, sometimes it gets very hard to adjust because it requires a different DNA in the company to make it work. But I'm going to go back into, I talk about different reasons why. One thing is very important to remember when you approach a company for acquisition. I'm going to call it the 10X rule. If whether it's revenue, strategy, growth, talent, if you do not see a 10X rule in what you're offering, do not even talk to the company, because if what you have doesn't have a 10X differentiation for who's buying, you're not going to have a strong conversation, whether it's the valuation or why they want to buy you or others. Again, at the time of our acquisition, there were multiple document management companies relevant to EMC. Why they chose EMC Documentum was because we were so close to their business model that the 10X rule actually applied to their market opportunity.
Thank you, Razmik. Rachel, you had recently gone through an acquisition, very successful EdTech acquisition, actually a rare event. Can you share a little bit of your experience and how you view, this topic, both from your experience, but also why would companies and when would companies decide to sell?
Sure. So sometimes when I work with companies now and they ask me, because they've seen that we were successful, oh, how did you know what to do? I often share that we didn't, and we made some mistakes, and we've since learned from those things. So I like to share those with companies. We were, when you're an entrepreneur and you start a business, it's because you see a problem in the market that you want to solve. No one is solving this problem, or they're not solving it well, or the way that you're planning to solve it. But what a lot of entrepreneurs don't think about, even though in their mind they're thinking, oh, I will build this and one day I will exit, is they haven't asked themselves, how am I going to exit? Who would be a likely buyer for the kind of thing that I am building? Who would make a good strategic partner? And if someone would make a good strategic partner for you, so like Razmik was saying, where if you add together your context and their core, then they are a potential strategic acquirer. And you actually want to go and spend time on sites like Crunchbase and look at acquisitions that have happened and what are companies paying and what are valuations. And that will give you an idea of whether your problem that you're solving, if you're successful and you grow, you're headed in a trajectory that you want. Are the exits that are happening something that actually interests me? So you don't, there's some other, very well-known folks like Chamath from Social Capital that said, you got to start with the end in mind. And he's right about that. You're much more likely to be successful in having a strong acquisition if you start with the end in mind. The other thing you have to do is pay attention to the greater market. So in our case, we went to conferences in our space. Of course, we went to, educational technology conferences, and we went to conferences that were human resources conferences for K-12 education in the United States, because that was our buyer. So it was just a normal sales experience, but you're looking around the space at who else is there. Those are people who might be competitors that, maybe they're going to be acquired instead of you. And we started to see over time, over a couple of trade shows, that the number of booths at the shows had shrunk. There were fewer companies, and that was because they were starting to get gobbled up by larger acquirers. And we realized that movement was happening in the space, that, private equity had entered, they had bought some of the strategics, and now roll-ups were starting to happen. And it occurred to us that there was a possibility of not being included in that roll-up if we weren't thoughtful about it. And it also begged the question, are we ready to be acquired? Are we preparing ourselves to be acquired? So it's kind of the timing, as you said, Lucine, is that you do have to be paying attention because the timing is important. Mm-hmm. So, and the acquirers, all acquirers are answering a really simple question: buy, build, or partner. Mm-hmm. They've identified an opportunity in the space that they want to take advantage of. And now they have to decide, do we have the internal capacity and the funding and the desire to build this thing ourselves? Do we get what we want in terms of synergies out of just partnering with somebody and we don't need to go the whole hog and buy them? Or do we want to actually acquire them and own either the talent or the IP or the market share or the revenue streams that acquisition will add to our, ability to seize this opportunity? So, paying attention to what's going on with acquisition also tells you what the acquirers are thinking and seeing as far as the opportunities on the horizon and whether you fit in with those. Our acquirer actually sat us down because we were already strategic partners. So that also often happens. You start out being partners and you get to know each other, and then that can lead into a long-term, beautiful friendship and acquisition. They were already partners. We'd been working together for a couple of years. They were acquired by a private equity firm. And they came to us with their plan, and they sat us down and they said, here's our plan. We want to put together a human capital management system. We're going to buy a bunch of point solutions that are best in breed and put them together. And, you know, you see here in this diagram where we have a little box for learning and development. That's you guys, you know, wink, wink. So that was our clue to really, we were on the right track and getting together our sort of company and getting it ready for acquisition. It was the right time and it was happening.
Thank you, Rachel. A great overview. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics, valuation, and how to capture the value in an offer. Maybe Ezra, if you could start again with a broader view of what do you see in the market and what are the best practices?
Yeah, can I just punctuate or highlight, put the highlighter on a couple of things that Razmik and Rachel said first. So first off, I completely agree with Razmik that even big companies are startups, right? A startup to an enormous company is a new path, a 10x growth path, as he said. It's about, and we're going to get this will back into the valuation conversation. It's about to them unlocking a big opportunity. Back to the directional point. But what he said is very wise about. Look, if they don't see it as if you can't pencil this deal out on an airplane size napkin, there is no deal. And so it's got to make so much sense, not a little bit of sense. It's got to make so much sense that it's easy to see. And then to Rachel's point, which is you know, she said a number of things. Both of them said a number of things that are incredibly valuable. So you're literally getting, you know, second by second great insight here. But, you know, when she said, look, they're thinking about partnering, or they're thinking about building, or they're thinking about buying, it's not they're thinking about those in equal weight. Buying is by far their last choice. It is the last thing on earth they want to do. They would much rather do anything than buy a company. And so my analogy that I tell to startups is think about, if they're not coming to you and aggressively pursuing you, they're not interested in the deal. There is no deal. Now, they may not agree with you on price, but there is no deal if they're not aggressively pursuing you. And I would say as a byproduct of that, given how hard it is to do acquisitions, if as an entrepreneur you think, hey, I'm just going to keep building the business until I, you know, and I'm going to keep trying to raise money, but if I can't raise money, I'm just going to go try and sell. Yeah. You will fail. So you will not sell. M&A is 10 times harder than raising money. So getting acquired should be something you're thinking about well before and developing those relationships. And it's not about, last point, it's not about developing those relationships to be acquired. As both Razmik and Rachel said, both these companies were adjacent. They were collaborative. They had relationships. Virtually every M&A deal you see at TechCrunch, looks like it came out of the blue, is the product of years of conversation and relationship. Maybe every 1 in 100 is something where someone reached across and bought something. The rest of them are the product of deep relationships and people having that. So that being said, to harmonize what Rachel and Razmik said to your question, Lucine, about valuation, if a buyer is valuing you on you, you're going to get a crappy deal. What are you? You're a company that's losing money, that's small, that's building product, that has a capital overhang. You are an incredibly unattractive economic asset for the most part, unless you're maybe up at the big scale, and that's a different deal than I'm guessing most people on this little call here. What you are is a significant advancement to their R&D efforts. They don't care about if you have X or Y customers. In fact, I would tell you about half the M&A deals we do, we get a call that says, how can we get rid of all these customers? And they actually don't even want your customers half the time. What they want is, as Razmik said and Rachel alluded to, is they want your team. And Rachel said her deal was, she said it was this, it was an acqui-hire. Every deal, as Razmik said, you don't want to walk in as an acqui-hire, but every deal below $1 billion is an acqui-hire. They're looking for talent, they're looking for direction, they're looking to help get them a path. So if they're valuing you for you, you're probably you're starting off in the wrong place. They're also, this is where I might disagree with Rachel a little bit. It's good to look at activities happening. I completely agree with that. What somebody paid for something else is completely irrelevant to, and I don't think she was exactly saying that, but she was saying, is there activity happening and what are the values? But what they paid for a person over here is completely irrelevant to what someone else is going to pay for you in the startup acquisition world. That works when you're selling a house. That does not work when you're selling innovation. So I think that the main thing to think about is your value to that company is their perception of opportunity divided by scarcity. And then the last thing I'll say as it relates to capturing value. Now, how do you get a good price? How you get a good price is by them believing they absolutely positively have to have you. That's the only way you're going to get a deal done anyway. And then the contextualization of the economics of the relationship and what it means to them. So if they believe that they can sell this thing, or this strategy is going to be worth $1 billion, then that is something where you can now get the present value of your contribution to that strategy. And so if you're discussing what the strategy is and what the go-to-market is with them, you're winning on the valuation conversation. If you're discussing what you are worth in and of yourself, you are losing on the valuation conversation. So keep pushing the conversation back to strategy. Keep pushing the conversation back to getting them excited. Make sure they have no other path forward except for buying you. And in fact, they call the strategy you, and then you'll get a good offer. But that would be the headline for it. And remember, it's going to take you 1 to 2 years most likely to get to that offer.
Yeah.
And of course, there is an informational disadvantage with an acquirer, even to start with, having full visibility to where the product roadmap is going, where the business strategy is going, where the holes and gaps are, why exactly are they interested in a certain technology and resource talent pool, which acquiree does not have that information. And then there is this whole due diligence process from an acquirer to truly vet out every single thing about a potential acquisition. So this gap in information makes it very difficult to have a very transparent conversation. So maybe, Razmik, you have so much experience on both sides. What would be the suggestion? And let's just continue that conversation of capturing that in the offer, the value in the offer, the gathering of the information to truly position the company in that strategy discussion, and then negotiating terms.
Well, again, I want to go back to tie to what Ezra said and what I was discussing in the context of my experience. It all depends on the acquirer, where are they going, and how much do you understand their future path of the, say again, back into EMC was information lifecycle management, and why the gap you're filling with your offering as a venture, as a company, is so valuable in that future path. Again, the value, it means valuation. The value goes back into how easily can you help them in terms of product, revenue, market access, that you can help them realize that future vision. And if it's not that clear to them, and if it's vague on how you add that value, the valuation becomes iffy, acquisition becomes iffy. And I think that's why what Ezra said, a lot of the acquisition ends up being, I call it elephant dance. It's a multi-year conversation. It's just like when you're dating somebody. It's gonna take you maybe 6 months to 12 months or even maybe a couple of years to understand why the match makes sense.
And you're probably going to get dumped.
Exactly, you're gonna get dumped. Yeah. So,
get dumped.
and if you don't understand how you add value in that relationship as an acquired company, then there's probably no deal. There's probably no interest. Just think about dating. It's simple as that. So going back into valuation. So again, it goes back into your strategic fit in their future path, and how quickly and how much of that can you fulfill with what you have. And it has to be, again, when there's due diligence and due diligence. There's a due diligence that happens once you sign the LOI, but at the time when they're trying to do valuation, they're trying to figure out, again, it's sort of a back of an envelope, how much of that future thesis or vision can you fulfill with your company or offering or revenue or product or technology, based on what they see and how you fit into their I call it market direction they're at. Again, it sort of comes into the equation of how much they value you. So at the time, when Documentum was being thought about for acquisition, there were 3 companies, and EMC was the best fit because we filled their gap best in terms of they had so much gap in the higher up on information management compared to others that I cannot name, that that they were paying, they're willing to pay a lot more, almost like you know, I don't want to get into numbers, but it was significantly more than what other companies. But it was because how much of the strategic fit we could fill today, and I think that sort of plays that kind of a combination of how you can realize their vision, and that vision is not just 1 or 2 conversation. I want to go back to what Ezra said. Our discussions with EMC started as a partner over 3 years, and it after 3 years, when they started co-selling with us, they understood how much value we provide as a product, as a company, as a marketing, sales, and our customers, how happy they are with our product. From that, they understood how much we can fulfill in what timeline.
Yeah, and I would echo what Rachel said about being you fit here in the box. I mean, first off, that tells you the scale of the other strategy those guys had, right? Much bigger. And then but you had earned your place in that box. You had earned your place in that relationship, and that took a lot of work to earn that place. So I think that's a great. Both of those are almost the same story in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and fit is really interesting from a lot of directions. So, you know, there were other online learning and professional development companies out there besides us. So to your point, Ezra, you know, the question of how scarce is what you're offering and could they get it somewhere else? But we did have a unique piece of what we did that was our most important offering, and it aligned directly with their most important piece of software. And none of the other people in the space that they could get content from had that piece. So that was how we partnered originally, was around that piece. And then the other thing that was interesting is cultural fit was really important for this company. And I think that gets overlooked sometimes. But a lot of, you know, studies show that, you know, acquisitions have a high tendency to fail inside a company, not produce the synergies that they wanted it to, not produce that 10x. And, you know, a culture, you know, mismatch, particularly if they are acquiring a lot of the talent and keeping the headcount, if they keep the customers, then that history of your company and where it fits in with theirs really matters. And so sometimes that's part of the dating too. It's, you know, are we really going to get along and see things the same way? And when you come into our big company, are you going to be able to work with us and within our culture?
And that's an interesting point, because we are in this context are talking about corporate culture, but then you get an additional layer, which is with an international acquisition. There is also broader cultural element and, you know, physical locations, etc. So I think there just maybe, can you expand a little bit more on cultural nuances as you are negotiating a deal or negotiating and finalizing the terms, for example? Razmik, maybe I could put you on the spot, since you have done on both sides with Armenian positions.
Absolutely, this is the cultural fit in terms of the distance. Like, I would say, absolutely. So I think, you know, several things I want to say is, you know, first is I've been involved with Armenia, as you know, in a long time, and one of the companies that I was a advisor was Integrian, which was acquired by VMware, and I was remotely connected to VMware buying Integrian, because VMware was one of the sister companies of EMC. So in many ways, again, I was not an operational executive. I was an advisor, investor, but I could see, again, what the reason why Integrian VMware worked, again, going back into strategic fit, is, but it's also, there was an element of, you know, they saw talent in Integrian R&D, which was 90% in Armenia, and they saw value in that, hey, what they've done for this analytics, data center analytics monitoring, it's so high value. And when they looked at the talent, that it just was so sought after, and they saw a critical talent in Integrian's R&D place in Armenia, that was an easy thing for them to say, we got to do this. So I think, in my opinion, the distance doesn't matter, but that cultural fit, going back into again, I've been to Armenia many times, but I know it because I was born in as an Armenian. But if you've not heard of Armenia, which is the majority of case, VMware didn't know what Armenia was. Vineti, when they were gonna do investments in building R&D center in Armenia, the first question was, what's Armenia? The only thing they knew about Armenia was, oh, it's close to Russia. Aren't you worried that Russia is gonna take the assets that we're doing there? I said, no, I'm not worried about that. But there's the cultural fit in terms of the people side. But when you deal with the remote essentially geographical location, a lot of people think about the geographical context of, wait a minute, there are other players that could influence how that acquisition could fail. Because remember, all the acquisition, it's about risk management, right? So anything risk, again, at the level of the team that is trying to acquire, the board is looking at what's the risk you're undertaking with that acquisition. And any location like Armenia or anyone, doesn't have to be Armenia, they're always going to look at the risks that could post acquisition could backfire big time. Cultural fit is one. With Armenia, I set up twice. I've been context of who's Armenia, what's Armenia, and how could Russia influence where we're going with this technology? I've sort of been seen that several times. So again, I think the other one is, I would say, it's how government or people do things. This is like the simple things like paperwork. It's like so different. I think like I saw this with Vineti, where we had to do simple things like forming the R&D center in Armenia. We actually some of even the things like getting a signature, authorized signature for office organization was like unheard of from our point of view. It was reasonable, but it was not what we were expecting from the West. So, I mean, those are minor challenges, but it still adds headache. Yeah. It still adds time to integrate the sort of a multi-geographical locations into one entity. So I don't know if I answered you, but that sort of experience I have. Yeah.
And that's an important consideration for international acquisitions, a layer that maybe purely American acquisitions don't need to worry as much. Apart from corporate, of course, culture, corporate fit, the overall logic for the acquisition, but that's something to keep in mind. In the next 5 minutes before we open up to questions, let's focus a little bit on the actual deal, structuring the acquisition, important documents. What are the takeaways that you can share, things to watch out for? We talked a little bit about the offer capturing the value, but term sheets, LOIs, and others. I'll open up the floor to you.
To Ezra?
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to jump in.
Ezra, yes.
Only a couple minutes. So these deals are, so first off, just back to Razmik and Rachel, and these deals, they take a long time to incubate. They take a long time to negotiate. There's all kinds of challenges, particularly if you're working cross-border, not just from a cultural standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. In the U.S., we have a thing called CFIUS, which now has all kinds of requirements for review, and then to close. They take a long time. So these are complicated transactions, and you have to be thinking about having time. So trying to do them in a hurry is a mistake, and you want to have flexibility and time to be able to execute them, even when they're entered into early on. And you start the negotiations and so forth. It's still a journey to get them closed. So with that, we are not, as you'll see if you read our book or watch some of our videos, we are not big fans of intermediary agreements. We like the final deal. I like to see the whole deal with our clients as much as possible. So I would say negotiating, and given that these deals are going to take a long time anyway, and intermediate agreements aren't binding, there's this sort of pervasive myth that that you have to have an LOI or you have to have a term sheet. And somehow that's an important step in the process, and that's going to somehow secure you a higher likelihood of getting a deal. And also that somehow that's a bona fide statement from the buyer that they're really committed to the deal. If I had one message, it would be don't believe that. Don't believe the hype. It's what gets somebody committed to the deal is keeping working on the deal. When they have lawyers working on the deal, they're committed. When they are engaging with you and following up with you, they're committed. When you get a piece of paper that says we really like you, you're not that committed. So what you want to see is people working on the deal and the things moving forward. Now, so ultimately, you may get forced into one, and you may want to modify it. But the biggest challenge with intermediary agreements are, one, intermediary agreements being LOIs and term sheets. One, they tend to bake economics early, and that's not favorable to you. It'll also be the high watermark of the deal, so the deal will only get worse from that point for the seller, not the buyer. And then the real hammer is almost every intermediate agreement you're ever going to have is going to have a no-shop provision in it, which basically means you can't talk to anybody else while you're talking to them. And they're going to give you a whole bunch of BS about how they're committing substantial resources to the conversation, that you need to sign this before we continue forward. Blah, blah, blah. That's just negotiation. So the reality is you want to keep this conversation fluid. You want to move to the final agreements, which are the only agreements that matter, as expeditiously as possible. And then we can talk more about that. But ultimately, the last thing I'll say, I want to turn over to the other guys, is this is an important transaction. You want to be honest. You want to be fully disclosed. Own anything that's bad early. Don't wait for surprises at the end. Oh, I forgot to tell you that we license all of our technology from my cousin's company. That's not going to end well, and you don't even want to go down that path. If you have things that are bad, you want to get them out early. So this is an important relationship. It's one that you want to be able to launch successfully. And so if there's good, great, but also realize that in any relationship there's bad as well. And so you want to get all that on the table and have a comprehensive conversation and not incrementalize it, because you'll end up at the end not having covered the things you needed to cover, and that will kill your deal after spending a lot of time and money. So anyway, I've dropped a lot on the table there. Hopefully some of it was intelligible, but I'll let you guys take it from there.
Well, I like to maybe add value to three things that I found it to be very important. One is due diligence process. Again, cultural fit in that, what you're gonna do. And then, is this the right fit? There actually three are very connected. And then actually the one of them that sort of all comes together is the integration strategy. So when you sign the LOI, essentially I call it, they're gonna start look under the cover. Again, due diligence process starts before the LOI. That 2-year discussion that they looked at you, that's part of due diligence. So again, goes back to dating. When you want to date somebody for 2 years or some period, you are considering that person. But when you get into due diligence, they're going to look at, again, your finances. They're going to look at your technology. They're going to look at your staff, your organization, your so on and so on. And again, what Ezra said, when you build a company from day one, first of all, you never build a company for acquisition, but making sure you're doing things on multiple fronts, because if you ever decide to go acquisition, which is more 80% path of success versus IPO, this due diligence process, you're going to have to go under the cover, show your books, show your technology. So, but acquisition is a lot more, I call it it's almost like a medical checkup exam. They're going to, like in the case of Documentum, we had to go through the code, had several external companies look at our code, bring in somebody like EY or Deloitte to look at our books over the years. And if just things don't look good or they don't look clean in terms of the quality of your practices, quality of software, again, a lot of times software company, what they're acquiring is the software and the people. So they're doing due diligence on the quality of the software, quality of the people, and they're going to bring an independent party. They're going to pay somebody big time to come and do this due diligence that knows how to do this job. But the important part, as you're going through this due diligence process, like why they're buying you, and I call it integration strategy. How do you fit into their future, and not only like one or two bullet points. And like in the case of Documentum buying eRoom was a collaboration product we bought. There was a strategy we're trying to fit the product, and if you don't quite understand how it integrates, and not the integration is not a just simple throw it in and it just start selling. It's going to require changes on both sides. It's going to require changes on your product roadmap. It's going to require changes on talent, both the parent and the acquired company. And if you don't like what you see, and if it's not the right fit from the conversation you're having in that integration strategy, believe me, walk away. So, but yeah, if you like what you see with the due diligence, with the integration conversation, and you see it's a right fit, then I would say you're heading down the right path.
Rachel.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that so diligence is super painful. And so having some conversations with people about what it's like to go through the due diligence process before that actually happens to you is useful, just so you're prepared for the fact that it's long and it tends to be pretty painful. And people are asking you to give them documents, and it's like, no, but I need it in a different form, and now I need 6 more copies of it. It needs to go to this person, and it's a lot of work. And especially if you're a small team, it's a lot of work. And the other thing, you'll want a lawyer who's been through this kind of thing. Like, don't pick your buddy's friend who's a lawyer. This is not the time to have a non-professional. You need someone who can advocate for you, because the interesting difference between the dating and marriage process and then this is that, yeah, you've been dating and you formed a really great relationship, and that's why you're having this conversation. And then they bring in their lawyers. And their lawyer's job is to take whatever their top offer was to you and lower it by going through your diligence and finding issues and ticking away at what they want to give you. That's literally, the lawyers are not on your side. Your lawyer's on your side. Their lawyers are not on your side. So you need to have a good relationship with the company, so that if the lawyers are pushing you around, you can actually call up your contacts at the company and say, hey, this is the experience we're having. Is this really how you intend this to go? And if you have a good relationship, then they will make sure that their dogs are not, too rough in sniffing you. But if they are, it can be a little rough. And that wasn't something I was expecting when I went into it. And so it would have been nice if I had known that in advance, that this is how, this goes. And it doesn't mean the company's not interested in you. It's just that they're trying to get the best deal they possibly can. And so the lawyers are going to look at everything. And sometimes that can feel like a departure from the great relationship that you had before.
Very good advice. And by the way, these deals fall apart for little reasons. I mean, it's funny, like I've been in situations where I've been on a call and I've been like, look, a week ago we were talking about differences of 25 million bucks. Now we're fighting over 100 grand. What happened? What happened in the last week? How do we go? Like, how do we chop off multiple zeros in our debate? It's just crazy, because people can't get out of their own way sometimes as well. So you have to understand, even just in doing the deal, there's human dynamics.
Yeah. So I'll go back to what we said. Do not build a company for acquisition purposes.
Yeah.
If you start with that, because even chance of getting acquired, it's still not that high.
Yeah. Okay. So questions, or how do you want to do the questions? I see some questions in the comments thing. Do you want me to answer that? I would say generally to be avoided unless there's a really good reason to do it. As soon as you take money from a strategic, they're going to put hooks in you for almost always. They're going to want rights of refusal. They're going to want this. They're going to want that, and also may make you slightly less attractive to their competitors who are probably relevant to you. So if there's a great reason to do it, if there's a commercial reason to do it, if that investment's going to come with a strategic partnership, it's going to give you distribution, it's going to give you scale, it's going to help you add value, and they want to participate in that value, that's great. Also, by the way, there just tends to be a lot of turnover at strategic. So 5 years from now, when you're trying to get decisions made, the person who ever did this investment probably doesn't remember, it isn't there anymore, or doesn't remember who you are. And so they actually become kind of a pain to deal with from a transaction standpoint. Now, there are great examples of people taking strategic investment and having great strategic relationships with those companies and being acquired. But I would generally say, unless you really see a business development purpose for the investment, stick with financial people for financial reasons and stick with doing partnerships for partnerships. There's got to be a lot of good reasons to blend the two. That would be my advice. Generally, lots of exceptions to that rule, but generally.
And my apologies, can you hear me? Even in Silicon Valley, we have internet connection phase out sometimes, so I'm back on. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful overview. We do have some comments in the comment from our participants, so maybe we can start with a couple of the ones as it relates to the strategic investments. So
I actually answered that one, so I think we can go on.
You did, wonderful. Can we talk a little bit about the split of return among co-founders and investors in case of an acqui-hire? That's a good one.
I don't want to hog the mic, but I'm happy to talk about all these. It's all I do all day. So just let me know if you guys want to talk about it. But in that case, look, acqui-hire, the fungible asset, meaning the asset that's tradable in a startup. And as Razmik said, you don't want to go in with this because this is a crappy lead. But it's the team. The human capital value in a startup is something that almost any company will buy and want for some price. So there is a residual value of your team value if it's a good team. But the reality is at that point, the buyer cares less about the investors and is really only after the team. So in that point, actually, the dynamics of the deal flip to where the team really has to take care of the investors and make sure that they're not getting a fair shake. Both for fiduciary reasons and for just being a good player, being moral reasons. So the challenge is in those deals that the buyer is going to be very aggressive to cram down the company purchase and really go after the team and try to create significant incentives for the team. So there is no, I wouldn't say there's no rule of thumb, but it's definitely fraught with moral hazards that you have to anticipate when you're doing acqui-hire deals because it's a funny end of the market. But there can be value there. And some of the bigger players, by the way, the really big players, the tier one buyers, the companies that we would all know, will actually buy the company for its market value on smaller deals. For its market value, if it was doing a third party deal, just to get their hands on the team, because they want to avoid this issue. The challenge is tier 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 down to N buyers are much more draconian and will take a much harder hammer to the cap table and really try to just get what they want with the people. But oddly, I would say the headline is that the responsibility for creating a fair deal actually flips to the team, to investors are taken care of.
So again, what being asked, this is something you want to, I call it, agree on. This is the investors versus co-founder share at the time of the company formation. And as you do more rounds of investment, as like you raise series A, B, C, during those contracts, you are either extending or adjusting investors versus the co-founders or employee investors. So you don't do this at the end. That never happens. It always happens when you're raising new round of financing. Now, having said that, what Ezra said, the moment you get acquired, the investors are out because you don't need the investors anymore. You need the employees that you can have value in the future path. And there's a different cycle of, I'll call it, how I'm going to keep this person for the next several years.
An interesting question here with about starting with an end in mind. Would you recommend designing a startup to be sold to a specific company as an exit strategy? Is that realistic? How timely can that be? But it's a very good question.
In my opinion, something like that, unless the strategic investor says, I'm going to buy you at the very beginning, I would say I would give it a 5% chance of success.
Yeah, I think you always have to start a company with the same purpose. You saw a problem that needed to be solved, and you thought that you were uniquely positioned to solve that problem. And what you're doing is serving a customer base and delighting them. Like that's your purpose, and they're giving you value in return by paying you to offer this thing. And that is the fundamentals of business. And it is interesting, having been in sort of VC and and floating around in startup, we often take our eye way off of that ball and say, like, is it important to think about, the acquisition down the line, and to think about your options, and have, your mind looking at the future? Of course, but the reason that you're starting the business has to fundamentally be because you think that you're going to solve a problem for a customer base, and that there is a big enough base of that customer that's willing to pay you to solve that problem. So I think that doesn't lend itself towards designing to exit to a specific company.
And the other one to think about is usually it takes any company takes on the average 3 to 5 years before a place where it becomes a valuable asset. And 3 to 5 years in high tech is a long time. So it goes back into what we said several times: market timing. What you're solving may be valuable today, but in 5 years may have no value. So if you're just building for one company, that market dynamics could change dramatically. So look at COVID-19 and remote workforce. Who could predict 2 years ago that's going to happen? As an example. So like the market dynamics could change in 5 years in terms of, and then if you're just building for one company, you're cornering yourself to them, which means they can, on that valuation, they can play all kinds of games with you when they want to buy you.
So offshore teams, especially in Armenia, an advantage or disadvantage, and how to position that?
Well, I said I have experienced several times. Again, I said in being investor to Integrium, but more so with Vineti. And I think Vineti, when we started talking to board, they didn't know. The conversation was, Razmik, we know you are Armenian, but we didn't know Armenia has any software developers. So, but then when we saw, after a year of working with Armenian software development, and they saw the value of how productive Yerevan's office is compared to Silicon Valley, it's sort of dynamic. It's shifted the whole, our board discussion. We need to invest more in Armenia. So I think it is definitely advantageous, but you have to, it goes back into, you have to produce results, right? Again, anywhere you go, whether it's India, China, Armenia, there's always issues on all kinds of fronts, like geographical, paperwork, political, but like India has more problems than Armenia, I'll be very honest with you, but let's not get into that. But I think if you produce results that is high value, people can sort of ignore the other issues that could be problematic. So I think as long as you're producing results to the startup, at the end of the day, it's a software company. Are you producing high quality software? Are you interacting with the team, and there's no issues in terms of how you work with the other divisions in other locations, and is the value high enough? That's how people are going to judge you. So it can be very advantageous as long as you're producing high quality value result. Yeah.
Life post-acquisition. And so in my experience, at least with the acquisitions that I had been involved with, most people, founders, had stayed at the VP level for a couple of years and kind of carried that through, but exited out the larger corporation. Few had stayed. So the model seems to be working within this 2-year time frame. Could you share your experiences post-integration, some suggestions you have for the founders, life in a big corporation?
Ezra, would you like to start first?
I'm mostly involved with the transaction itself. So I am involved. I would say that the good news is we've generally been part of, because of our process, we've been part of acquisitions where they have apparently, from what we see, turned out pretty well. We have a very high rate of our founders, for example, staying for multiple years at the acquired company, which I would say is a good indicator that we've been part of generally successful combinations. Mm-hmm. But and blending the other question as well, I think that the world changes dramatically. I mean, if you're usually an innovative tech company, you're going to be pulled into a much larger group, and your role and your what you work on is going to probably start to get heavily changed, and also you're in a bigger company now, so it's a different world from doing a startup. So I would say generally we've seen our founders that we've worked with stay on for a few years, but I've also seen them eventually roll out and do new things because they're founders at heart. So eventually they get the itch again. But I would say, look, I think that yeah, your world's going to change dramatically. What your day to day, you won't have to worry about getting your next paycheck, which is great. But your day to day is going to be substantially different when you roll into a much larger company.
Yeah, and one of the other things to consider too, whether you stay with the company that acquires you or you don't, is when you've sold your company, you sold your job. So, and if you don't stay with the acquirer, or if you stay with them for only a short time, I was there for about 2 years before we left the acquirer, you usually have a non-compete, in your space for some period of time. So all of that, capital that you built in an industry, your connections and your knowledge and everything, it can be hard to leverage that again for a while. So, in our case, there was very much a sense of now what? And that's a real thing to think about, because if you're selling pretty early in your career arc, in your late 20s, 30s, or even in your 40s, there can be a little bit of a sense of, oh, now I have to reinvent myself. So it's one of the things to consider, and why, acquisition is not always going to be the answer for everyone in every situation. And you might think, I like my job and I like my company. I think its arc is solid for the future, and I don't want to sell my job. So just something to consider. And yes, it's very different to work for somebody else, and especially somebody else that's a lot bigger than you, than it is to be the captain of your own ship.
Well, thank you, everyone. We are at time. Unfortunately, 1 hour is really not enough to talk about all aspects of M&A or acquisitions. And, the conversation can continue for hours, days, and as you mentioned, experience takes years. But we hope that this was a good high-level overview of kind of key things to think about. And there will be many other, I'm sure, talks and conversations that Hero House will organize. So thank you to our esteemed panel. Thank you, Hero House. This was a great conversation. I enjoyed it much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.